In September 1774, the First Continental Congress met, and they met to discuss how are we going to continue to deal with the British who keep taxing us and making some of us royal colonies. And so they wanted to make sure that they had this issue taken care of. However, by April 18th, 1775, the king wants to take care of this Congress. They think that since this Congress met in September, which keep in mind it takes a while for communication to travel across the ocean, that anybody who was involved in this Congress are rebels and should be put down because they're basically going against their country, which would be at this time Great Britain. So Governor Gage sends his troops are sent to Concord to seize the rebel weapons because there has been reports that the rebels are um, stockpiling artillery and weapons, and that a lot of the rebels are being supplied with money by Sam Adams and John Hancock. John Hancock at the time was one of the wealthiest businessmen in the colonies, incredibly wealthy. Sam Adams is also a known agitator, and so the king of Great Britain wants to take care of these. So he wants to arrest these two leaders of the rebel cause, and he wants to make sure that the colonists do not have any weapons to fight against the British. So on April 18th, they are sent to arrest Sam Adams and John Hancock. This is where you come in with Paul Revere and William Dahl's daring midnight ride. Most of what you know from Paul Revere's midnight ride is actually just folklore because Henry Wadsworth Longfellow in the early 1800s decided to write a poem about it. The story that you've heard a lot is Paul Revere jumped on his horse and rode throughout Massachusetts on his way to Lexington Concord to warn Sam Adams and John Hancock, you need to leave, the British are coming to arrest you, you need to move on. His other thing is he wanted to warn the rebels to hide their weapons, prepare. The British are coming to take your weapons. The British are coming to take your arsenal, which is what they would consider a whole bunch of weapons and where you would put all of your weapons. So Paul Revere actually had William Dahl actually go with him. Paul Revere will actually be stopped and arrested early on, so he doesn't make it that long. But the reason why we know about Paul Revere is literally because somebody wrote a poem about him about 30 years after the fact. So it's not incredibly historically accurate. So Paul Revere is doing that on the morning, late night and then early morning of April 19th. So he's riding around saying, the British are coming, prepare yourselves. So as the British are marching towards Lexington Concord, which is probably about 20 miles, I think, from Boston, so it's just kind of suburbs. They're marching through the suburbs. They're going to arrest John Hancock and Sam Adams and take the weapons. These people are warned. They are ready. So as the British get near to Lexington and Concord, they are met with colonial militia. This is a ragtag group of militia. Just imagine your dad or your uncle out there with a gun, ready to fight whoever is invading you. May not have been trained that well, but has a gun and is going to use it if need to. So on April 19, 1775, this is what they call the shot heard around the world. I must explain, a shot was not literally heard around the world. It is a metaphor, meaning that it will impact almost every country throughout the world. Okay? So when the first shots are fired of the American Revolution, they will be fired on April 19, 1775, but it was not literally heard around the world. It is a metaphor, all right, for the impact that it will cause later on. So who are the leaders of Lexington Concord? Well, for the British, you have Sir Thomas Gage. He is the British. On the Patriot side, you have Captain John Parker, and he's in control of the colonial militia. So not George Washington, but Captain John Parker. So this is starting with the Battle of Lexington. There are 70 Minutemen waiting for the British at Lexington. They weren't expecting to see anybody. They kind of expected to catch people maybe still eating breakfast, just getting out of bed, that type of thing. But when they get to the common area, kind of like an open grassy area / park of Lexington, and Lexington is very small at the time, they come across 70 men who are standing there armed and ready. They refuse to leave. Nobody knows who will fire the first shot. The British are told not to. Captain John Parker is telling his colonial militia, do not fire. But who knows, since, like I said, no historian knows who's credited with firing the first shots. All we know is that a shot was fired, and in that point, everybody starts to fire their weapons. As the British are leaving, they leave at Lexington 8 colonists that are dead and 10 wounded. So in the first few minutes of battle, 18 of the colonists are taken down. The British then continue marching on to Concord. to once again arrest Sam Adams, John Hancock, and take the weapons. This is just a picture of what the green may have looked like. You see the British in the back with their red uniforms, and then kind of our men just wearing what they would normally wear every day. So the Battle of Concord. So I do combine the Battle of Lexington and Concord because it's happening at the same day. It's happening not too far away from each other because it's a continuous march. So the British once again encounter more colonial militia as they march to Concord, another kind of sleepy small town just outside of Boston. When they get there, they burn the ammunition that they found, so they don't find much because the colonists are really good about actually running and taking the ammunition. However, as they are marching, this is why we say that the Americans won this first battle. So even though I don't know why some people say that the British won, they didn't. If you just go down here and look at the numbers, 250 British are killed versus 100 American colonists. If you look at those numbers, just that, then the British lost 150 more men than the colonists did. The way they do this is that the American colonists use Native American fighting tactics. They use guerrilla warfare or guerrilla attacks. That means they're hiding behind fences, trees, shooting and then running, shooting and then running. They're not lining up in a field waiting to just be cannon fodder. They are following these British troops as they are marching in a line back to Boston. They are firing on them constantly. They might be up in trees. They might have the best advantage points, but they are not a clear target for the British to fire on. They're kind of coming at them from every other way, and then they'll disappear. And so that's why the Battle of Lexington Concord is such a major colonial victory. It also starts showing that even though we don't do it in every battle, that we will start utilizing some of these Native American tactics. Many of the battles are still fought like you think, where both sides line up and say, do you want to surrender? And both sides say no, and then they shoot at each other. So what's the historical significance of this? Number one, they did not actually use lightsabers. That's actually just a little Star Wars picture here with the Death Star in the background. But the historical significance is the first actual fighting. We would not say the Boston Massacre was the first fighting. We wouldn't say any problems with the Boston Tea Party is. This is the first battle of the American Revolutionary War, where it's a kind of a no going back after this point. So from this point on, we will be called the American Patriots or the American Colonists versus the Loyalists. The Loyalists are people who remain loyal to Great Britain. So you have the British versus the Patriots. Okay, and you might know of the New England Patriots today, just in case you care. And then we go into the Second Continental Congress, and this is one of the last things I'll say about this. So Second Continental Congress met in May. They had agreed to meet in May back in September, but they meet 3 weeks after the first shots are fired. Because they meet in May after the war has started, they have to scramble. They have to scramble and form some kind of government that can keep this war effort moving. So it's going to be our first national government. It will not last, but it's what we would consider a provisionary government, somebody who makes sure that troops are getting some kind of payments eventually. When it says it's unicameral, it means it's one house. Today we're a bicameral legislature, a bicameral Congress, which means there's a Senate and a House of Representatives. It was so small at the time, it was just unicameral. Everybody worked together. The main job of the Second Continental Congress was to raise an army, make treaties. One of those treaties would be, please make a treaty with the French so they ally with us, and of course fight the war. They need to come up with volunteers and form a Continental Army. And they unanimously decide to have George Washington lead that Continental Army. So our Continental Army, aka our Patriots. And we'll stop here and we'll get to this later.